Prime Minister, we're most honored to have you here and to support this very important agenda. So I'm thrilled to welcome you to the stage. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. For a forum on regulation, maybe at some point you may need to make a regulation on lunch breaks and make sure that everyone gets back on time. But really honored to be here to talk on the topic of regulation, and definitely related to energy. Energy, which is a topic which I think 10 years ago would not be at the core of economic policy. Today it is definitely at the core of economic policy for many reasons. One of them being our transition to a net zero society, but also, of course, geopolitically, what has happened over the past years. I think in Europe, in general, we have a tendency to regulate quite well. I think our regulation is of high quality, and in other domains often serves as a standard. If you look at what we have done with GDPR, and I know a lot of people have complained about GDPR, but GDPR is worldwide seen as the standard and is often being adopted as something that is a reference to others. I think the issue is that for something we do quite well, we have a tendency maybe to do it a bit too much. And so we regulate quite well, but we have a tendency to think that this is the only lever that we have in achieving our objectives. Regulation plays a role, but innovation and financing plays a role as well. And so good regulation leaves enough room for innovation and is combined with the right structure for financing. And Annika, you told me to not use Draghi in every sentence. I understand that. Though I am a big fan of him as a person and of the work that he has done. I think if you read the Draghi report, you should always do it in combination with the Letta report, which is the one on the internal market. By accident, we asked two Italians to write those reports, but both of them are actually very high quality reports. And the Letta report, of course, creates the environment, the internal market environment, which is not complete yet, to be combined with industrial policy, which is more discussed in Draghi's report. I think that if you want to do good regulation, which is light enough, we should try to figure out what each one is good at. And in principle, you have the public sector being governments setting the regulation, and you have the private sector, which is active in that environment. What are we as public sector good at? We are good at setting objectives, and that's our role. That's what we should do. What we are not good at is, in general, it's figuring out what is technologically the right method to achieve those objectives, what you could call innovation. Governments are historically not good at innovation. That's not our objective, and that's because innovation works with trial and error. Governments are not entitled to do trial and error, though we do some errors from time to time, but it's not in the typical spectrum of innovation. And so the one issue that I see is that in Europe we have a tendency to regulate on the objective, but also to regulate on how to reach the objectives. And that's not the right thing. And so we have a tendency to be much too directive on and the objective on how to get there. And you can see that across many domains. One of them, for example, is our whole hydrogen strategy, where we are also trying to define which color of hydrogen you can use to reach the objective of net zero. We should not be doing that. We should be very clear on the objectives of emissions. How do you reach there? We should be much more open-minded and have much more belief in innovation, which is something, and we might talk at some point about IRA, where IRA is actually quite good. IRA is very technology neutral, is based on taxation measures, whereas ours, this is an instrument which as European Union we don't have. We have a tendency to try to fix everything in our regulation. and then to add layers to serve any political purpose that we might have. CSRD and the many other packages of regulation that have been created comes in a sphere where sometimes it is reporting for the sake of reporting. And I know some of our Belgian industrials who today, especially in the chemical industry, are recruiting full departments. It's departments of between 50 to 100 people just only to do reporting. Just fill out forms and fill out documents where we could ask a question, what is this really serving to? I mean, what goal are we serving besides a political goal where you can say, well, at least we asked them to report on it. But asking someone to report on something that is never going to be controlled or never really going to be used, you could really ask if we're not just putting too many layers of regulation on. So that's one domain I wanted to touch on, is we regulate quite well, but let's focus ourselves on what we are good at, which is the objective setting, and let's be much more open on how to reach it. That's one element. That's the innovation element. The second element, I talked about innovation and financing, is the financing part. And the financing part, I think, is something which is, we do not put enough emphasis on. We have talked a lot about the lack of a capital markets union in Europe. And I've been finance minister, this is now 7 years ago, and this was the core of the finance minister's discussion. 7 years down the road, it's still the core of the finance minister's discussion, and in any of the reports of Letta and Draghi, you will read what the issue is. And the issue is that in most European markets, you do not have a growth capital market. You have it in Germany, you have it in the United Kingdom, which is not in the Union anymore, and in France you have it. All the other countries, you don't really have a growth capital market. And the reason is, of course, that growth capital today brings money, but also brings a certain degree of expertise. So your funds are siloed into certain industries. Markets like Belgium, the Netherlands, and others are not big enough for that. And often those are the economies that have the highest degree of innovation. If you look throughout Europe, what are the most innovative countries? It's typically the Scandinavian countries, Netherlands and Belgium. These are the powerhouses of innovation and have a true lack of what I would call specialized finance to support it. There's two answers to that. One answer is a lever that public money can play, and I believe that public money has an important role to play. The issue is that on the European level up to now, if we do that, we have to find a compromise between 27 countries, and so we end up with a fund where we give every of the 27 just a bit, and then in the case of Belgium, within Belgium, then we have to give Brussels, Flanders, and Wallonia just a bit, and so it gets really spread out. There is a counterexample to that, and the counterexample is what we did with the EU Chips Act. The EU Chips Act was trying to build again a strategic advantage in semiconductors. And the EU Chips Act is the first time where, for a budget of, I think it's 3 to 4 billion, we did not say we're going to give every 27 a bit, where they really looked merit-based and said, where is the expertise? And the expertise is, I think, with Fraunhofer in Germany, is with Leti in France, and is with IMEC in Belgium. And they allocated purely based on expertise and asked each of these centers, now you go out and try to find partners throughout Europe to make a network. And to me, what we have done with the EU Chips Act really should be an example of what we should be doing with the Industrial Act, which is really looking at expertise and not at political balances. That's one part of the story. The second part of the story, of course, is the EU capital market, which is not there for the moment. It's not that we have a lack of capital. I mean, the European continent is a continent with a lot of capital. The savings rates are still quite high, and each of our inhabitants in general are looking for savings scheme or investment schemes which have a higher return than what they typically would get on a savings account. Now, what is happening today is that a lot of that money which is in pension funds and so on is actually going to the United States, is being invested in typical US private equity funds, who then come with their capital in Europe, buy up our startups, grow those startups, and make a huge value added on it. And very often that innovation that is taking place in Europe, so the growth of it is being financed with our own money, but the margin is going to the US capital managers. And the introduction to market very often happens first in the United States, often today in China, and then only afterwards in Europe. So what we see is a missing connection between Europe as a continent of innovation, which we are much more than we actually say out loud in the public, but the growing of that and the market benefit of that is not happening on our side. That again, we can do with regulation, but with taking away regulation. So one of the reasons why the Capital Market Union is not there is that, for example, our bankruptcy laws are very different country to country. A lot of our financial regulation is quite different country to country. So harmonizing that will be a big part in financing, for example, the green transition. So that's the point that I want to make in this introduction. I think that in the world of today, what we need is agility and being focused. Being focused, this is what we need to do as regulators, what we need to do as governments. Focused in the sense of putting the objectives forward. Agility is innovation and is fueling innovation. And this is something where we as regulators need to step back as much as possible and create an environment where the trial and error of innovation can take place and where the financing for that is present. I think that this whole regulation space is a fascinating one. It's something that we Europeans actually do quite well, but our reaction to the fact that we do it quite well should be, let's do it a bit less instead of doing a bit more. Thank you.
So I would suggest, first of all, thank you very much. I think some of what you said was music in the ears to some of the industry members here for sure, about technological neutrality, about the need for focus and maybe avoiding too much reporting. I would like to follow up with a question and maybe then open questions to the audience as well. I would like to ask you, because when you listen to you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, and when you listen to our American partners speak about energy and clean tech, they are very assertive. They say we need US manned, US built, US fueled clean tech along the whole value chain. They have a very clear picture of where they want to land. Is this where we should go as Europe, in selected sectors at least? And combined with that, how should we position ourselves then towards China? We do have value chains, we do receive a lot of modules from China, also with the pressure from our transatlantic partner to decouple.
Good question. I think first of all on IRA, I think the European reaction to IRA, from my perspective, but this is now almost 2 years ago, was too aggressive. Were there problems with IRA? Yes, there were a few problems which were discriminating towards Europe. But we've been complaining for 15 years that we want the United States on our side of the table on the green transition. Finally, they do. Well, we should welcome them. We shouldn't say, oh, no, we don't agree with what you did. So I think the intent was the right one. Of course, and we shouldn't be surprised of IRA, because manufacturing subsidies is something that the United States have always had. So the perspective of IRA is not that new. It is new because it was very green focused or transition focused, but they've always worked with subsidy schemes on manufacturing. Of course, a part of how the United States looks at it is that they want to remain the biggest economy in the world. And this is part of their reasoning. I think we as Europeans, in our attitude towards China, I don't think we have a perspective of saying we want to be the biggest, we want to remain the biggest economy. That's not, and so that is why I think our relationship to China is something that we as Europeans should define ourselves and not let it defined by the United States. In any case, we have elections in a month in the United States. Whoever wins, it will be more America first. In the case of Mr. Trump, maybe a lot of America first, but even in the case of Kamala Harris, it will be more America first. And our only answer as Europeans should be, let's stand on our own legs. But as a European Union, we have much more to gain with trading with the rest of the world than the United States has. And from the perspective of China, I mean, if you are China, who is your #1 trading partner? It's Southeast Asia. Who's your #2 trading partner? Is the European Union. The United States is only the #3. So from a perspective of how much leverage we have with China, actually we are in a stronger position. Now there's a lot of discussion, especially in the energy field, of how far do we go in believing in free trade and so on. And the example is often given on photovoltaic cells, which we were leading on, and now the whole industry is in China. And do we want the same to happen, for example, in offshore wind and in many other domains? I think we need definitely not decoupling. I think we need to remain trading with China and with the United States. But a more geopolitical perspective, yes, definitely. We definitely need to be much more selective and define certain domains where we want to maintain our strategic independence, but also be clear that in other domains we absolutely have no problem to compete and to let the market play its role. This is a skill which we as Europeans really haven't developed over the past years. We're not really good at that type of industrial policy. When I started as a politician 15 years ago, industrial policy, my first answer was always, there's only one rule, government get out of the way and just let the market do it. That has changed. And so that skill of having a sound industrial policy and a sound view on what technologies are going to be important and which ones could create dependencies is a skill that we urgently need to develop, and which is to the benefit of every member state. But I prefer that we do it at European level than that every country tries to figure it out on its own.
Okay, I hear you. We should be more realistic, but also more assertive in a way without seeking dominance, if I may summarize.
That's a good summary. Yep.
So, mindful of time, I would take 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Vera Brenzel, I see you.
Hello, Prime Minister. I have a question. I understand that Belgium has gone through the crisis, the energy crisis, much better than other countries. Your growth...
You should tell that to our voters, but yeah.
Apparently, the growth figures in Belgium were 1.4 or something. All the neighboring countries were at least flat, if not negative. We also understand that German chemistry is keeping Antwerp, but really reducing Ludwigshafen and other sites. What is your secret trick? What do you do better than others?
Well, there's a few things which are purely geography. Is that coastal access is becoming much more important than ever. And so a big part of the German chemical industry has no coastal access. And the Rhine was important, but the level fluctuation of the Rhine is becoming a real problem. And this is, for example, why Ineos is trying to build a cracker in Antwerp. That's because of coastal access. So coastal access is a very important element. And of course, Antwerp is the second biggest chemical cluster after Houston. So there's a big base there. So we can be positive on that. But if you look at it, the last 4 years, we haven't attracted a lot of investment. Neither has any of the European countries. But if you compare it to the rest of the United States, the situation in the chemical industry is one which should really preoccupy us. This is why last year we worked on something which is called the Antwerp Declaration, which lines out what the principles should be of an industrial future in Europe. The new Commission with Ursula von der Leyen made it clear that they want to incorporate that within the next 100 days. We're a big fan of that approach. More in general, our growth figures indeed remained around between 1 and 1.5%, whereas in many of our neighboring countries it was around 0. Why is that? I think there is an element fairly said which is a consumption effect. We are one of the few countries which has automatic indexation. Many of you will complain about it because I guess you have to pay salaries one way or another here in Belgium, and salaries have increased a lot. And of course, when consumption is supported, then that has an impact on your growth. But the combination of location and innovation is a key one. And we have a reputation of being the country of chocolate and beer and the European Union, but we are a country of innovation. And we don't say that often enough, but we talked about semiconductors. The #1 semiconductor research center in the world is in Leuven. If you look at biotech, there's not many places in Europe where you have such a high concentration. So you are in a place with a very high concentration of innovation, a very open society, which attracts a lot of workers from around Europe, and that consumption effect. So I'm glad you mentioned what you said, but underlying, I'm not going to say that we are scared of what is happening in our industry, but we're very worried of what is happening in our industry, and we're confronted with exactly the same problem as Germany, the Netherlands, and the north of France. And this is one of the issues that I have seen over the past years, is that especially the chemical industry is not well represented on the political forum. When we have a European Council, in the heads of most heads of governments, chemistry is something that is dirty and no one wants. Everyone uses it, of course. So that industry, which is really at the core of almost everything we do, is really not well represented because there's maybe 4 or 5 countries that know it. Germany knows it well, Belgium knows it, France knows it a bit, Italy, Netherlands, and some others, but it's very, very concentrated. So it lacks a bit of clout. Maybe last element is access to energy. We made the choice to not do the nuclear exit. We were going to do it. We changed it around. This, I think, is the most complicated thing I've ever done in my political career, negotiating with a French company, NG, which publicly had said, we want to stop nuclear, and then tell them that actually they're going to continue nuclear, which is really not an easy thing to do. I've seen that Germany has not made that choice. I would love to see if it is maintained in the next years. I think that countries with our energy structure will need nuclear in any case. Nuclear is not the solution to everything, but I'm convinced that it is a big part of the solution. And keeping our current nuclear assets is, for the next 20 years, the easiest thing to do. I understand what is happening with SMRs and so on. SMRs are small modular, well, you're all energy people, you know what it is. And that's good, but the nuclear industry is especially good in PowerPoint. Their PowerPoints are amazing. But making it happen in practice is always much more complicated. And so I think that the next 20 years, just extending the nuclear assets is the easiest thing to do. 20 years later, the SMR technology might be there. But for the next 20 years, I think we should do everything to just keep it open. This is not a criticism, it's just sharing my experience.
We're not discussing nuclear today, but technological neutrality for sure. And,
yeah, okay.
But thank you for your candid words. And I think you've really left a mark on European politics, also for the term to come. You mentioned the Antwerp Declaration, and you will be missed duly here in Brussels, for sure.
I'm not gone yet. Because in Belgium, it sometimes takes some time before you have a new government, but we'll see.
Thank you very much for coming, Prime Minister.
Thank you.